watch for Ryan too. I don't see any Ryan right now.
Okay. I don't have a cell phone number for Ryan too, so I'll get in touch with him as soon as we get going here. All right, welcome everyone. We're going to start with an opening prayer today, so I'm just going to pass it to over to my friend Lenora Manyfingers, who will get us started that way.
Okay, I'm going to say a Blackfoot prayer. I'll try to get it both Blackfoot and the English version. Okay. Ayo ninna abstaduki. O Father, the creator of life, we are glad to greet you today. Gimokinan, pity us. Hear us. Bomokinan, help us. Gamutsipiokinan, guide us. Ayo, oh, nitakokitsistuaka sinan. Help us raise nuko sinanix, our children. Ayo gamutani, oh, to survive and samat bitapis and live a long life. Gutsiman, that we may acquire napios and to reach old age. Amen.
Thank you for that, Lenora. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm sorry about the glitch at the beginning, but despite the glitch, still having 100 people on with us as we have this conversation today is truly wonderful, I think, and we're excited to have you on. My name is Renee Bourgeois, and I want to welcome you here from Waskahagan, which is also known as Edmonton here in Treaty 6 territory on Turtle Island. And I just want to welcome you on behalf of Coalitions Creating Equity. Coalitions Creating Equity this is Coalitions Creating Equity Edmonton, who I'm representing, we're on hosting on behalf. Here in Edmonton over the past year, there's been a number of local organizations that have been coming together and trying to grow together towards strengthening our response to hate, racism, and discrimination in our community. And Edmonton is one of 5 other municipalities across the province that have been part of this CCE effort. And I just want to acknowledge that term municipalities, because as I was writing, it felt a discomfort with it, because it is a colonial term, and it is one of those terms kind of boxing and defining the land that has been taken. So yeah, it was an interesting reading on that, and I think, you know, we'll be talking a lot about this as we move forward. This effort, this Coalitions Creating Equity effort, has been supported by Reach Edmonton, and it was funded by the Alberta Human Rights Education Fund. That fund is no longer in operation, and just as somebody who cares about human rights, it does concern me, because I do think human rights education is such a critical piece of resilience. And it's kind of, I think, when I've gotten to know, and all the people that are on this call today are such, I think, to me, represent they come from a real heart of justice and human rights. And I think that's where we find resilience. And I just want to, I'm very honored to have them all with us today. And the human rights piece is important for me too, in the sense I think of Senator Sandra Lovelace, somebody I have admired, because she was one of the first people in Canada who decided to challenge the human rights in Canada at the United Nations through filing a human rights complaint there, and resulted in looking at gender discrimination in the Indian Act. And it resulted in shifts in the Indian Act, but that very document, the very foundations, are at the very foundations of I think what we're going to talk about today, and it goes back even before that. So over the past year, the conversation among organizations that were part of CCE was really rich, and I think it strengthened relationships and trust among those that were there and who participated. However, some of our colleagues, Indigenous colleagues at the table, pointed out that still at the very end of these discussions, the Indigenous voice around this issue was still missing, and that we needed to push that conversation. So this is the fourth of a series of gatherings where we're wanting to come together and have these discussions. And so just before I go any further, I just want to shout out to those organizations that have been part of that facilitation team over the past year: the Alberta Hate Crimes Committee, End Poverty Edmonton, John Humphrey Centre, who I represent, Native Counselling Services of Alberta, Shiloh Multicultural Education Centre, Creating Hope Society, the Organization for the Prevention of Violence, and also Edmonton Police Service joined partway through. I want to honor all of you for being here today, to be part of the tough conversations and being able to sit in the discomfort of our history and get honest about it. We do have our own George Floyds here, right here in Edmonton. We have our own George Floyd, and there's many more. There's, as we know, the missing and murdered Indigenous women, all of this kind of roots around the issues we're going to talk about today. So I'm just going to say one last housekeeping thing was we are going to leave the chat open, but given the numbers of people on, but also that we want to honor the voice of those that have come to share with us today, that maybe we can hold chatting until later on in the discussion, and we can kind of use that as a place to kind of pick up the conversation. So I just also want to acknowledge, you know, Native Counselling Services. I've had the privilege of working beside Rocky Ward for a while now. I'm really honored to host this conversation with her today, and I acknowledge I was very uncomfortable in my whiteness being the one to open this today, but I thank you for the prayer, Lenora, and grounding us in the right space. I appreciate that. But the rest, I will be quiet, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Rocky.
You're passing it to Rocky?
Yeah, I'm just asking her to unmute.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rocky Ward. I'd like to welcome everybody to this very important session where we can share, learn, and be together in a good way. I'm of Métis descent. I'm a mother of 3 adult children and 6 grandchildren, and an aunt and niece to many. I'm employed through Native Counselling Services of Alberta as a program manager for the Indian Residential School Health Support Program, as well as a Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls program. I've been with Native Counselling for 23 years, and I have learned so much, and working with organizations like the John Humphrey Centre has really helped me be fuller and more compassionate, and just understanding all the help that we can provide throughout our communities, our many, many communities. My parents are both deceased. My father was Cree and French, and my mother was French and Italian. I grew up feeling like I didn't really fit in the European culture. I was too Indigenous, and I was too white for the Indigenous culture. But both of my parents taught me to be proud of who I was, up to a point, and I'll explain a little bit more. My father embraced some of our culture as Indigenous peoples, but we did it really quietly. He taught me many of the Métis dances and spoke about Louis Riel and how he was a supporter of our Métis culture. We would do our Métis things, and when there was not in public, we would do them in private. And also he was in the army. So when he was in the army, he was taught that being Indigenous was not a very healthy lifestyle. So he encouraged me to live through my French culture and become non-Indigenous. It was only after I had left home and started being inquisitive about the Métis culture that I finally and truly became Métis. I got my Métis card, took up more Métis jigging, and learned how we as Métis culture came to be. And Now, I know that we've all heard about lateral violence, so this may be kind of an example of preaching to the choir. But if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, I'd like to speak about lateral violence. I want to name those actions to help us remember that when someone is speaking, that we may hear things.
So I started off in Tampa, and I played for the
Sorry,
Saints.
Rocky.
That's okay.
I played, Buccaneers. That's by design, yes. And you injured?
Thank you.
Rocky, can you just unmute yourself? I just muted everyone. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, so I want to name those actions to help us remember that when someone is speaking, we may hear things that we don't agree with, or it may trigger us. This will help us to remember to pay attention to those feelings and honor them in a good way and not act out in a negative way. We also need to remember that everyone has a right to their opinions, both professional and personal, as long as it's done with care, respect, and compassion for others. We all have our unique way of interpreting things, and because our perception is our reality. So let's pay attention to how our reality can affect others while still remaining true to ourselves. So lateral violence, as we know, is alive and doing well in every community, whether it's a large community or a small community. Lateral violence is so insidious that it just creeps in sometimes without our noticing it, unless we pay attention to how we speak and treat others. Lateral violence can be both covert or overt. Both are as damaging to our hearts and souls and relationships, one as the other. So some examples of covert actions are gossiping, and that's speaking about someone without their knowledge. Whether it can be either positive or negative, still speaking about someone without their knowledge is an example of covert action. And also telling a secret that we were told. Now the secret, if it was told about themselves, like someone saying, you know, I'm going to get this job, but I don't know, but I don't want anyone to know. So that's, but they want you to keep that secret and you go and tell someone, that's gossiping. Or a tone of voice. Now, some people have a loud voice, but it's how they use that voice. You can have a loud voice and still be respectful, but if you use that loud voice in a disrespectful manner, and you make someone feel uncomfortable, then that's lateral violence. Sarcasm. Now, this could be a joke that's not appropriate, insensitive. It could be about your personality, your height, your race, your culture, what you eat, what you don't eat, anything that is personal, that can certainly be. Rolling eyes. Now, this can become a habit if you're not paying attention to it. But rolling eyes when someone is saying something and you're not noticing it, then, you know, it's up to us to pay attention to the things that we do. Crossing arms. It's not only the crossing of the arms, but it's how you do it. If you do it in a huff, if you do it in an angry manner, if you do it with a noise, and like when someone says something. So ignoring someone, acting as if they're not even there, not recognizing them, not including them in the conversation, excluding them by your body posture, by remarks. If there's a group of a whole, you know, like maybe 15 women and one gentleman, and you say things like, well, all of us women, or someone from, you know, that's from another, you know, that isn't male or female, that doesn't define themselves as male or female, and you say she and him, that it can fall under lateral violence. Covert actions are less obvious and sometimes may be unintentional. So that's why I keep saying we need to pay attention to our actions, to our tone of voice, to the things we do, things we say. Well, overt actions are obvious. Some examples of overt actions are hostility, and that can be with a look, it can be with a stance. Name calling, and it could be using your race, your culture, your nationality, anything, saying, well, if, you know, all those people from that culture, that's That's lateral violence. Using swear words, using words that make you feel uncomfortable. Taunting. This is to tease, insult, antagonize, demoralize, or anger someone. And very often someone will taunt another individual, just hoping some kind of reaction, either physical reaction or a verbal reaction. Interrupting someone while they're speaking, making the person feel like what they're saying isn't important, and making demeaning remarks. Criticizing someone in front of others, making a joke about the individual, their rate, their height, their race, their culture, but doing it in a supposedly joking manner, or so it would seem. If a person makes a person feel uncomfortable, demoralized, less than, not acceptable, not on the same level as the one making the remarks. Lateral violence isn't a trademark of any culture. It's in every culture and every walk of life. It is not only happening in the low-income communities, it's also happening in the affluent communities. And sometimes it's not as obvious, but lateral violence is everywhere. It's in our workplaces, in our communities, in our homes, in our playgrounds, in our schools, on our buses. We need to take a closer look at ourselves and see if we're perpetrating lateral violence, either covert or overt. That's a challenge we need to take on, all of us, ourselves. We need to be responsible for our actions and how they are interpreted and how it affects us and others, whether they are our family, our friends, someone in line at the supermarket, someone behind you paying for their gas. We need to be paying attention to this, and that is our responsibility. Well, we're all from the same race, the human race. We probably all have done some of the above actions. I believe education is our best tool in preventing unhealthy attitudes and actions, and also by enhancing how we work towards a respectful, healthy, and meaningful relationship. So, ta-da.
Thank you, Rocky. So now we're going to head back down southern Alberta, or southern from this area anyway. Lenora Manyfingers, I'll invite you to share your reflections and thoughts, what you'd like to share with people today about hate and the realities. You can get us going in the next step.
Good afternoon. Just welcome to all the viewers and participants. Thank you to Renee for bringing us together and being there for advocating for our human rights as Indigenous people, well, for all races. Thanks, Renee. I want to start off with the session says it aims to educate our community partners within the coalitions creating equity on the realities and impacts of hate on Indigenous community members, particularly as it relates to here, Southern Alberta, Treaty 7. And I'm sure a lot of our Indigenous people, it happens the same way. First of all, I want to start off with in Lethbridge. We've had a lot of serious incidents, unreported, no follow-up by the police, or no charges were laid. For instance, there's one serious incident involving Indigenous woman who was walking to the 7-Eleven store on the west side of Lethbridge when one of her daughters was grabbed by white people yelling, "White guerrillas." The mother ran and jumped into the vehicle and grabbed her daughter. She called the police, but nothing was done due to no license plate number. The woman knows how this person looks, and he had a tattoo. She even went looking for their place of residence, which she later found. She was cautioned by AHCC and the White Buffalo Trailblazers to lay low. I called Dr. Debbie Pace to help this family through this trauma they were experiencing. To this day, there was nothing done about that. I'm sure if it was a white person, the police would make sure that the woman was and the child that was taken would be interviewed and get descriptions and all that and follow up on it. But no, because it was Indigenous, they didn't do anything. Same white guerrillas are creating a lot of are assaulting a lot of our Indigenous people in Lethbridge. I can't say it's just the white guerrillas, but a lot of our Indigenous people are being targeted by non-natives and being beaten or chased. One incident, there was a young woman strolling her baby. She was strolling her baby in downtown Lethbridge when a white vehicle came and they came just going right straight towards them. And when they tried to do something about it, they couldn't do anything because no license plate was given. How could somebody take a license plate when it happened so fast? These assaults, these type of stuff have been ongoing for decades. I can say 30, 40, 50 years. And we're still at the same place. The police brutality is not, it's there, but it's always the police culture that needs to be changed. The way they treat or look at us Native people. That's with law enforcement, discrimination and racism, but by not investigating complaints or not acting on them, disregarding of Indigenous side of story or incident. In Cardston, the RCMP and the bylaw officers were harassing street people in Cardston. There was 2 incidents where advocates had filed a complaint. In same place, Cardston, there was 3 complaints filed against the hotel manager, verbally harassing and bullying the Indigenous employees there. We have racism and discrimination in medical institution, the discrimination and racism in the emergency rooms, where some places where at the triage, where the registration takes place, that person is doing self-diagnosis. She's diagnosing these people before they even say anything. And sometimes they'll say, oh, what kind of pills do you want? That's not good. Long-term care facilities, sometimes our people are just ignored. The hospital patients, we've had a few people that have complained about what has gone on. The clinics, there's a lot of stuff. The ICU patients and families, the families can't, because our culture is, we're all together, and when something happens, everybody's there. And because we are such a tight-knit community, Lethbridge is 45 minutes away, everybody goes there. But yet, we still get treated with disrespect. Another time in an emergency room, a person went there and same thing. They just were giving him painkillers and he ended up in Calgary. His gallbladder almost burst and he could have died from that. Then we have, we have the doctors, some of them, like here, Lethbridge, Cardston, our people will go in and they don't do a thorough assessment to get a proper diagnosis. Not like how it is in Calgary. I know we are small communities, but still, can't they go out of their way to try and ensure that these people are well taken care of and that they're not going to be treated that way. also with the organized sports, that it's always us versus them, and our children, especially our children in schools, our high schools, junior high schools, when they go out and they're in competition or playing a game, they have to play extra harder because they're playing not only against the team, they're playing against the refs, they're playing against the fans. You know, look at what happened with this last incident in Lethbridge, where the grandpa had to get on the ice and take care of this one guy because he assaulted the little boy, and nothing was done about that. And with Alberta's Alberta Child Welfare, if a child is assaulted, that's a serious incident, but nothing was done about this guy. It just all focused on the on the Native person, Indigenous person, and he got charged. What happened to the ref? Nothing. Also, I remember back in the day, in high school, I was in junior high, and our high school basketball team were in the championship for the zone 4A zone championships, and they were winning. We had our drums out, we were cheering away. We weren't calling down people, we were just cheering, and they won. Anyways, 4 years down the line, again, our high school team ended up in the 4A championships, and we were banned from using our drums, from using our cowbells, or, you know. So these kind of things, just little stuff like that, does play a major part in how our people are being treated. In education, all or most of our indigenous children are classified as special needs off reserve, just so they can get more money. I remember when I was in university, when in the management classes, a lot of the management classes, we had to work in a group. But guess what? Whenever I got chosen, I was one of the last. When it was so different in school, when I went to school under res, I was always up there in my marks, and I was good in sports. So going to university was a culture shock, where I was getting picked last, or when I get into the group, I wasn't heard. Everything that I was told was disregarded because they thought that we were just dumb Indians. But no, today we have a lot of smart people. You don't see them on the streets because we're all working. We're all in this together. The people on the streets, well, it's unfortunate they're on the streets. We're not the only ones on the streets. I myself have seen a lot of other races on the streets, and I don't go targeting them. We don't see our Indigenous people targeting them. And it's all because of the way we are seen, and it starts from the top, right from way back when the colonialism started. The prime ministers and all that were looking down on us. They created the system so that we can be assimilated. But today we're fighting back. We're not going to be assimilated, and there's no way you can take the Indian out of us people. We are standing together now, and a really, really good example for the lies, the stuff that oppression is Mr. Kenny's Prime Minister or Premier Kenny's speechwriter, Mr. Bunner. He should be let go. I mean, if it was the Holocaust, he would be immediately removed. But no, now they're making up excuses, or Premier's making up excuses to keep him on. But that's not right. You don't go around treating people like that. And just what Rocky finished saying, lateral violence starts from the top. So I hope everybody goes to this change.org and signs this petition for Mr. Bunner's termination. That's all I can say, but you got to understand our history, and our history is we never let go. We never got annihilated. We didn't cede our land. We were there to live in harmony and friendship with the people that were coming onto our lands. And today we still do that. You come to the reserve, you get invited to the reserve. We welcome them, we treat them very good, but then it stops right there once we're off reserve. So today, I'm just reminding everybody that understand the history. This North America is all First Nation Indigenous land, and everybody has signed that treaty, including every white person, every race out there that is in Canada right now. They've signed that treaty. It's not just the natives, it's everybody's treaty. With that, I will end.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lenora, for that. I'm just going to call out quick. I think is Ryan? Ryan, are you on here? We couldn't find you in the midst of all the people. If you are, can you unmute yourself and come on board? Okay. So it looks like maybe Ryan, we've been watching out for Ryan, keeping space to make sure we can let him in, but we haven't seen him come in yet. So we'll keep our eye open for Ryan. But what we're going to do, we'll just move forward. And Sandra, I'd like to, I'm just going to move this back. I'd like to invite you to come forward. I've met Sandra recently. I mean, we have roots back around Wildwood Entwistle area in Alberta, but we've been part of the 2 core members driving forward a community response on Facebook, and it's been a true honor to get to work with you, Sandra. So I'll pass over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Renee. First of all, I want to say what an honor it is to be here today and have this kind of a forum. These conversations have really gone unspoken for far too long. And I'm very grateful that we have such a good turnout to listen to some of the things that are going on currently and what we can do to take action to start making those changes and facilitate some of that. So the first thing I wanted to do was read out the definition on the Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, Article 2 from the United Nations. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, such as A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and C and E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. I fall into that E category. I'm part of the 60 scoop. I was apprehended as an infant and grew up in a predominantly Caucasian town just west of Edmonton. And for all intents and purposes, I lived my life as a white child. So moving into Edmonton and into more urban areas is when I started noticing that people were seeing more my ethnicity than who I was as a person. That really bothered me for a very long time because I'm not necessarily what appearances would first tell you, because I was raised completely removed from my culture. As an adult, I've had the opportunity to go back, meet my family, learn about the culture, and start participating in some of those ceremonies. So that's really important to me to be able to do that. But in saying that, there comes a lot of animosity, I guess you could say, just living life day to day. I was recently a recipient of a 60 scoop settlement for loss of culture. I was denied my culture because of my removal, and spent all my childhood and quite a significant part of my adulthood not knowing that culture. So we were compensated recently with an interim payment. Now, the company that is responsible for doing the disbursements for those payments emailed all the major banks in Canada and those other, like the Treasury branches and charter banks, to let them know that this money was coming and to not let it impact the people who were depositing these funds into their bank accounts. So fast forward 3 weeks, we have had significant amounts of our people who were removed from their culture feel abandoned all the way around, from both white society and Indigenous society, being investigated for fraud for something that they were given to make repairs for what we've lost. So it's really difficult when you go into a bank and you find out you're investigated for fraud just by simply depositing a check, when the bank should have known that. There's numerous instances whereby security was called. People had their accounts frozen because it was such a large and unusual amount to be active in that bank account, even though the banks still had that information at their availability through Collectiva, the class action people. So those are some instances where discrimination is really paramount and so embedded in today's society. And how do you ask the questions? Who do you ask the questions of? And how do you seek to move beyond those kind of things? I know we have a lot of problems with our justice system. I've also been impacted by that through an emergency protection order, whereby I walked into my local detachment to have it honored. And I can honestly say I have never felt more Indigenous in my life by the way I was treated in that detachment. I went so far as to contact K Division and file a complaint because I felt that they only saw the color of my skin. Because I've had that different upbringing and was raised literally as a white child, I come from a different perspective where I can see both sides of the fence while I'm walking along it. I'm never going to be all in one society or all in another, but I intermingle those every single day in order to do the best for myself, my family, and the people around me, and to help us decolonize this learning. So one of the things I wanted to touch base on is like the subtle racism. The people who follow you in Shoppers Drug Mart. I told my mother, who is white, that this had happened, and she couldn't believe that somebody would follow me. And I said, but Mom, it's based on the color of my skin. It's got nothing to do with who I am as a person. So there's things like that, like going into Superstore and having security follow you, things like that. And I'll go up to them and I'll say, if you're going to follow me, at least carry my groceries or be of some sort of assistance, because what you're doing is unacceptable and you're profiling me. So being able to have that ability to speak out about it takes a lot of courage from a lot of people. And a lot of people have been so oppressed by the colonial system that they can't speak out. And it's those people that we need to improve this society for, so that those ones that can't speak out for themselves can still feel like they belong in this society. So one of the things I invite you to take some time afterwards and review is a story called Richard Cardinal, Cry from a Diary of a Métis Child. It's available online through the National Film Board. But one of the things that I've always said is, and this is a really tough pill to swallow, but in my heart, I truly believe this because I've lived it. But a lot of people don't understand that this country was built on the backs of Indigenous children. Through residential schools, there was no education to be had in those facilities. We were sent there to remove our culture, to remove our Indianness, to learn how to be good farmers and good housewives. Those farmers helped build this country through slave labor. The 60s scoop, where because of the traumas of residential schools, so many of our children were apprehended, that they were also used as slave labor in farms, and they were beaten. It's a very, very sad story that many people in this country don't know happened. So I invite you to do some more research and, you know, take charge of it and do your own research, because honestly, we've been saying it for years, still falling on deaf ears. So I invite everybody that wants to be an ally, considers himself an ally, to research what the actual history of Canada and its relationship with Indigenous people has been. And it has been an attempted genocide. In all honesty, that's exactly what it has been, because the government has tried to assimilate Indigenous people into mainstream society, and we know that doesn't work. We also know that I'm Cree. My counterparts are Métis, they're Blackfoot. There are so many different Indigenous societies in this country people are not aware of. We did a session at Canada Place in Edmonton about 2 years ago, where we had an exhibit that spoke about the 60s scoop and the atrocities that were experienced. And a gentleman had just come out of an immigration session and told me in tears, how come we never learned this when we were going through the history of this country? And that makes me question, why is this history not being told? We would have a better, more well-rounded society as a whole if we knew the history from both perspectives. I had a conversation with a friend of mine that I went to high school with about history and how it needs to change. And he said, history is always told from the point of view of the oppressor or dominant society. And that's true to a point, but you need to grow from that, because obviously there's more to that history than what you're being fed in schools. So slowly the residential schools are being taught about in school. There's a lot more room to grow. 60 Scoop is also starting to get into the curriculums in that. And I see a really good future for my children, for their children, and a lot of children in Alberta. But I think we also need to look at it from the perspective that people my age, people in between 30 to 50, maybe even up to 70, need to have that kind of education about what really happened in this country, because I think their opinions would be changed. And I'm just going to leave off here with one thing that I would invite you all to consider moving forward is, when you refer to Indigenous people, please do not say our Indigenous Canadians or Canada's Indigenous people, because that implies ownership, and that leads to very oppressive kind of thinking. We are not Canada's Indigenous people. We are Indigenous people of this land. And I think that above anything else, for me, is the most important teaching that I could leave you with today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sandra. It was lovely. All right. So the next speaker that we have up in line is Melody Bastien. Melody, also coming from Piikani area nation. And Melody, I've come to know over the past 3 years as one of the most resilient human rights defenders I've seen. And I know she will have a lot of strong words to and wise words for us today. So Melody, I'll invite you to take the mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Melody Bastien. I am from the Piikani Nation, which is part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Which is, most of you know, is Southern Alberta. So I am a social worker. I am a founding member of the Epistemics advocacy group that 2 of my former classmates and I created to bring awareness to racism and discrimination in Southern Alberta about 2 years ago, and has become an entity of its own with the complaints that come almost on a daily basis. I get so many complaints from people, whether it's the education institutions, the doctors, hospitals, eye doctors, police, city police, RCMP. It's the whole gamut. Like I get complaints about so many things that sometimes it's really hard to keep up with. You have to be knowledgeable in many things. I recently, I'm also on the Anti-Racism Council of Alberta for the Alberta government. Hoping that it's going to make some kind of an impact eventually. And then we've been trying really hard to I'm trying to push for dealing with hate incidents in Alberta, because I've heard so many parents come to me to talk about their children being harassed and discriminated and assaulted in minor hockey, which just, I cannot believe that adults will assault and demean children, and then the RCMP do nothing. So right now I'm in talks with K Division, with their Indigenous policing unit, and talking about a number of different cultural workshops that should be done, and also not to put us all in the melting pot. Like, we're all very distinct, as the former speaker talked about, the Crees, the Blackfoot, the Métis. We're all different. We all have different customs, and I feel that RCMP officers who work in our Blackfoot Confederacy should be educated on our protocols, our ceremonies, so that they are knowledgeable and they don't do things that offend us. So right now in my community in Piikani, I'm working on a partnership between the RCMP, our traditional Ganatsimagaks, which is our Brave Dog Society, who were the protectors of the Blackfoot, of making a partnership with them to doing security within our community because of violence, drugs, COVID. And so we're going to start that next Monday. We have 8 of our Ganatsumidaks who are going to start doing this security in the evenings. And so it's going to be groundbreaking. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the discrimination that we get with within our treaty rights. We get uninsured medical benefits. And there are so many doctors, eye doctors, dentists, who will not even take us with our uninsured medical benefits. My son has always had a really good job, so he's had benefits. And one time, the dentist told his wife, "Oh, just to let you know, we won't be taking uninsured medical benefits anymore." And she said, well, she questioned them. And then they said, "But it's okay, your husband has really good benefits, so it's not going to affect you." But because of the principle that that's part of our rights to have these medical benefits, they went out to find a new dentist. So those kinds of things happen on a daily basis. Our people who don't have benefits have to shop around for someone who is actually going to make that effort to process the uninsured medical benefits. So there's a lot of things that happen to Indigenous people on a daily basis that we need to work on. We need to educate and take that time to talk to people about how we feel when we're treated differently than other people. And it happens, I find it happens more in small towns. And sometimes it's really hard to constantly be educating people and not get angry, because I've had to learn to really control my anger, choose my words wisely to make more of an impact when I'm speaking with other people. But like Lenora said, we encounter it everywhere in southern Alberta, at the hospitals. My son suffers from a mental illness. I bring him to emergency, and the person who's taking his information is more concerned about why he doesn't have his identification than the fact that this guy is trying not to have a full-blown episode and destroy the waiting room. And I bring that up constantly about those things, like, what's more important, getting him help or making sure he has adequate ID? You know, so there's all these little subtle things that happen. Like now, as working in child welfare, I found out that every time an Indigenous person has a baby, right away they're screened for drugs. Like, really? Like, that's what they do. And as my daughter is having her first child, I'm thinking I have to be there every minute so that she does not have somebody trying to assess her because my grandchild might be addicted to drugs. Like, why should I even be thinking about that when at this time is a very happy moment in our family? We're having a baby. We're, you know, excited, a new life is coming in. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, but my daughter is probably being profiled. So those are the kinds of things that not only do I deal with in my personal life, but in my volunteer work, I try to make changes not only locally, but you know, province-wide, trying to have an impact that makes it a safer place for our Indigenous children, because I don't want my children to grow up, my grandchildren to grow up thinking that they're less than, when to me they're perfect little human beings that could aspire to anything. So those are the things that I want to see the changes made, and I'm trying to be a part of those positive changes and building the relationships, even though sometimes it's really hard to control my anger and disgust of what is going on. And I'm done again.
Thank you so much, Melody, for all of that. And it was just the word normalizing was just ringing in my head about how just normalized this all is for the mainstream. They don't see it, right? And yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. So our next speaker is Johnny Lee, and Johnny Lee is somebody I've been able, similar in the last couple of years, been getting to know, and is somebody who I think makes it a point to come into community and shake it up a little bit, and which is important. You know, those spaces of discomfort are what help us to evolve and grow. So I'm looking forward to having Johnny kind of share some of his thoughts and perspectives on this issue. Johnny, I'll pass the mic over to you.
Hello.
Hi, there you are.
You're not watching my, I have my, my dialogue here, my notes. You're not seeing it, right? You see me.
We see you and the notes.
You see the notes too?
Yeah,
Oh, man.
it's for people who can't hear so well. We have.
Okay. I'll just, I'll close this.
We want to see you too, you know.
Can you still see my notes?
Yes,
Hey, you can?
yes, take it away.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. It's an honor to be sharing with everyone today. I am Nehithau, a Woodland Cree through my mother, though my mother did whisper to me once due to the push of colonization, we're actually Swampy Cree from the southwest region of the Muddy Water, though unfortunately someone discovered and renamed it the Hudson's Bay. You know that, yeah?
Okay, yep. Go.
See my notes, right?
Natalie,
Hey,
she can't see him.
huh?
Go ahead. Natalie says she can't see, but I think maybe keep going.
Anyway, don't read my notes. Okay. Yeah, we're actually Swampy Cree from the southwest region of the Muddy Water, but someone discovered it and renamed it the Hudson's Bay. And my father is Plain Cree, most likely from Papa's Chase. Yet also my uncle tells me we're also Navajo, descended from royal blood. I just want to point out how I did not utilize Cree in my introduction because my language was taken away from me, and I'm not one to pretend, as I'm too old and with too many Cree speaking friends to start learning now. I've been learning and working around social justice issues for 7 years, and one of the most important lessons I can give is one well known but still not given enough attention, which is to look for the story behind the story. My talk is about Canada, a judiciary system that perpetuates as it tries to resolve the very problems it created. I want to discuss language and the importance of context today. Still much of the discourse around social change is still framed in the wrong story. An historical example could be the cry of many settler nations for freedom and prosperity, which on this continent has always and only been realized through the impoverishment of Indigenous peoples and the hijacking of Indigenous sovereignty. Systemic racism is a hot topic. Oh, where are we? Is a hot topic these days, but again, the wrong story is being told. And so the real lesson that can resolve the issue isn't even available to be learned. This is why I really appreciated the Writing Relations Invasion film screening event. The language in the film and panel discussion is one that truly reflects our story. Because although in some ways the treaties are something for our people to stand on in courts, we also have to realize that Canada has always been at war with us because our mere existence is a threat to its legitimacy. Upon reflecting on the use of hate in the title of this webinar, I thought how dangerous the narrative could be, because I don't believe anyone truly hates us, or that we hate anyone, except maybe Barney the dinosaur. We are the only human being. We are the human being, and natural law makes it impossible for the spirit being or the mechanical human to hate any other living being or thing that is essential to our survival, unless we are tricked into doing so, thus leaving us in confusion, and then we die. I think we can hate an action or reaction. We may hate a circumstance or the absence of circumstance, but it's against our laws to hate each other. And I feel the use of the word hate in these discourses as identifiers between each other might simply invoke reactions of hate, fear, and further division. Because our ancestors taught we are all related. My brother is I, and I am my brother. It would be likened to self-loathing, and the act of self-loathing only occurs as a result of external influences such as peer pressure and childhood trauma. I remember loving my father even though I hated what he did to our family, and how I hated that he was not the man I needed him to be. For years I thought I hated my dad, but nobody explained to me then how our people can be groomed for dysfunction. Get you while you're young, around the age of 4 or 5, and they'll create exactly what they want you to be. It wasn't until I got into this work and learning the history of colonization, I realized it was okay to love my dad, because my hate was misinformed and misdirected. My hate started long ago in a series of documents called the Doctrine of Christian Discovery. I keep hearing our women say, "Where's our men? Where's our protectors?" Then I hear about one of our women, how she's trying to escape some of our men who continually bounce from gang life to prison life and back. There's still an overrepresentation of Indigenous people with homelessness and substance abuse. But the majority of organizations, including Indigenous ones, that are supposed to help our people are still using a colonizing language. One that says, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get back in that square peg hole. Largely, our people are not being healed or mentored to become mentors or leaders in the Indigenous community. We're still being told Canada is the only game in town and you have to play by its rule. You have to start at the bottom and work your way up in a system designed only for the strong capitalists to survive. This is often Indigenous people assimilating their own into a colonial construct when the language should be one of, no matter your stage in life, you have a responsibility to the people and to the land in accordance to our laws of delegitimizing these systems of economic slavery, poverty, and environmental toxification. Imagine the army of world changers if they had only a guaranteed basic income and the guidance and tools to become those mentors and entrepreneurs of the future, rather than simply dusting us off and throwing us back into a machine that ground us up and spit on us in the first place. Just a few years ago, I know we still had many Indigenous rehab centers operating with an archaic 12-step so-called 5% success rate methodology. They wouldn't even address historical or childhood trauma as they were not trained or certified to do so. Perhaps there's an area right there for experienced mentors. Likewise, we never resolve the issue of racism either we will never resolve the issue of racism until we recognize it for what it really is, an instrument of colonialism. I'm currently working on a documentary in which one question I'm asked to address is how racism is different to Indigenous peoples than that of newcomers. Well, basically, racism against Indigenous peoples is a culture of multiple nations, particularly European Christians, perceived right to commit or thereby be complicit to the unlawful appropriation of the freedoms and responsibilities entrusted to the Indigenous people in good stewardship. In other words, racism is colonization, as stated in the Doctrine of Discovery. deny us our sovereignty and you deny the dignity granted to us by the Creator. Whereas racism against newcomers is largely about Christian white Europeans' fear of new settlers disrupting the status quo, conflicts of religion, or the economic creation of competition and scarcity. And where one may witness Indigenous people perpetrating seemingly racist remarks such as "go back to your own country," you may find mere frustration over the sovereignty Canada stole and so proudly flaunts through the privilege of its citizens. Because to be honest, many of us who blurt such hurtful expressions are usually doing so in response to not only the systemic disempowerment, but to an act of racism being knowingly or unwittingly perpetrated against us at that time by your colonial or settler victim. We must watch and keep in mind racism is a mechanism in political agendas. There are remnants of wars past and tactics to divide the masses in false narratives. Racism towards ethnic groups began as wars for resources and land. I've talked to a few people who were in the military or near to, old vets and young, all said the same thing, that racism is embedded throughout their training, right out into the battlefield. My theory is that in order to condition people to kill other people, you must demonize those you want killed. Then that brainwashing for battle carries through history in grand stories of conquest. However, here on Turtle Island, we were never conquered. We were swindled. And soldiers didn't need to be conditioned to hate an enemy they've never met. All the incentive for impression was provided in the Doctrine of Discovery and its promise of prosperity. If we seriously want to solve the issues of racism, we have to first understand the history and nature of racism, and then look at it with a contextual lens today. If done right, you just might discover that in a colony founded on the subjugation of the Indigenous people and theft of our entire land base, one group's fight for equal rights will always be at the expense of Indigenous sovereignty and our inherent rights. Years ago, I questioned how these initiatives have progressed. And someone told me about, I think it was a female author who wrote that racism and anti-racism discourse only further to entrench the culture of racism, and that we needed another method of tackling the work. And the way I see it, the discourse on racism is the integration of new settlers into a colony of consumerism. A discourse on colonialism works to dispel white supremacy and racism as the proper roles as guest and host is realized, thus bringing peace and justice to all the realms of the Indigenous peoples. I'm tired of seeing in the media, Indigenous issues as riding the coattails of other movements such as climate marches and Black Lives Matter in a quaint mention in our own territories. And although many are true allies, many are not and have their own interests and agendas. And I think that play on an old saying, the strongest wolf is the one you feed the most. Anyone remember the Mice Maze Society, in which they run mice through various mazes and study them? Well, I don't recall hearing any of the highly trained mice for search and rescue missions, because these mice mazes were utilized for the study of behavioral psychology. And if you look around carefully, you'll see the results of those mice studies. They're not going to waste millions of dollars on a bunch of albino munchkin rats for nothing. I want to stop talking about racism and start talking about criminalizing white supremacy and delegitimizing the sovereignty of the colonies. Stop talking about the equal and economic rights and start recognizing Indigenous sovereignty and the economic lie. For every 4 to 8 years, new policies are created and good work being undone. The colonial governance system is not the solution. It is becoming increasingly clear that only with the wisdom of Indigenous people guiding Canada and Indigenous laws overshadowing Canadian laws will we ever have hope of balance being restored in our nations. A couple years ago in a conversation with Quetzalcoatl friend and matriarch of Camp Cloud on Burnaby Mountain, we were talking about a strategy on getting our message out. I said that we had a lot of our people still in the system, and it was the system which we needed to go. This didn't sit too well with Quetzal. And George Manuel Jr., who was sitting there, asked me what I meant. So I further explained that we needed to go into all these places, get to all our people, and get them out of the colonial system mindset and back into the Indigenous way of knowing. And that's what I try to do. I go into a lot of these places that discuss organizational policies, community initiatives, municipal policies, and all these game-changing initiatives in an attempt to get people to come to the dark brown side and away from the white. And oftentimes my methods are not well received, as my tone can be off-putting. But I do what I do and how I do it for many reasons. One is my sovereignty. There are so many false narratives out there with the political most prevalent. Like when they say free, prior, and informed consent does not equate to an Indigenous veto, which obviously it does if you understand any English. That's colonization, and that's where racism starts. Then there are the demonizing Muslims to protect the religious practice of Christian white supremacy, or attacking Chinese people because of an industrial created virus. It's how we tell the story that either creates or destroys racism. If we have to get as loud and unforgettable as possible with the truth, because a lot don't want to hear it, and they just want to hear the version that justifies their place in society. Whatever you do, don't shut off your pain. Accept your pain and remain vulnerable. However desperate you become, don't shut off your pain, because it is in fact trying to hand you a precious gift. The chance of discovery through spiritual practice, what lies behind sorrow. Don't we know, and only far too well, that protection from pain doesn't work. And when we try and defend ourselves from suffering, we only suffer more and don't learn what we can from experience. And that was from the Tibetan book of Living and Dying, that little paragraph there. You know, the whole colonial system and much of our discourse on a new paradigm shift seems to be largely centered on a colonizing narrative. It is only by breaking away from this narrative and bring the doctrine of discovery into our circles should we move forward. And while everyone is talking about rescinding this doctrine, we need to talk about the papal encyclical Sublimis Dei as well, which brings into the call the legitimacy of the colonies and their laws. First, I'll share a portion of the Pope Nicholas's bull of 1452, and then a paragraph from the encyclical book Sublimis Dei. Hang on. Okay, here's that 1452 Doctrine of Discovery. Invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ, wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate them to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his and their use and profit. I was from Pope Nicholas in 1452. And then in 1537, Pope Paul III wrote, and this is in regards to the enslavement and evangelization of Indians. I just want to read one part of it. We who, though unworthy, exercise on earth the power of our Lord and seek with all our might to bring those sheep of his flock who are outside into the fold committed to our change. Consider, however, that the Indians are truly men, and they are not only capable of understanding the Catholic faith, but according to our information, they desire exceedingly to receive it. Desiring to provide ample remedy for these evils, we define declare by these our letters, or by any translation thereof, signed by any notary public and sealed with the seal of the ecclesiastical dignitary, blah, 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 to which the same credit. Not that notwithstanding whatever may have been or may be said to the contrary, the said Indians and all the people who may later be discovered by Christians are by no means to be deprived of their liberty or their possessions of their property, even though they may be outside the faith of Jesus Christ, and they may and should freely and legitimately enjoy their liberty and the possession of their property, nor should they be in any way enslaved. Should the contrary happen, it shall be null and have no effect. It basically means, by my understanding, Canada and the US are illegitimate entities. Now, even though many say Sublimis Dei was rescinded 1 year later due to the pressure of the Spanish Empire, further study says it was not. What was rescinded were sanctions put out in an accompanying letter to Christians employing the doctrine of discovery to subjugate our people and steal our properties. Pastorale officium. But most importantly, Sublimis Dei does lay down a clear dialogue from which we can employ our work. And remember, doing social justice work in a good way does not mean an easy or comfortable way. And be careful, your judiciary fight for equal rights and prosperity just might be in the context of the ongoing subjugation of Indigenous peoples, as well as the health and well-being of all life. And I think we'll end it with that. Yeah, I'm done.
Awesome, Johnny. There's lots of comments and how articulate and how, thank you for speaking truth. So thank you for that. Johnny, there was a question about the documentary you referenced. I think you said you were working on a documentary. Do you want to share any more about that at all?
Yeah, sure. It was to talk about the impacts of the doctrine of discovery. It's for the Christian Reformed Church, particularly the mustard seed. I'm writing the script for it. I'm almost done, pretty much done the script. Hopefully it'll be done in a month or so. I don't know how long editing is going to take or whatnot, and more filming, but I'm excited about it. I tried not to get too much of what I put in there into here, but there's a little bit of overlap. But it's going to be pretty interesting, I tell you. I hope so. I hope it's going to be.
Thank you. Gina says, thank you, Johnny. I felt that deep in the core of my being. I'm now following you on social media, so the word needs to hear your words. Melody, I had a question for you earlier in relation to the Anti-Racism Council at the provincial level. When has it met? How frequently? Is it active?
We have met twice. After our first meeting, we had the provincial election, and so there was a lot of changes with the new government coming in. We do have a meeting this Saturday where we are going to hopefully start working on some of the issues that we see within our government and our society. My thing is I keep pushing hate incidents, and I'm just going to keep pushing them.
Right. Thank you, Melody. Okay, so I'm just going to check the time. We're at 3:25. I'm thinking we could probably... Oh, and Chantal is asking, I think this is for you, Johnny. Do you have a Kickstarter or GoFundMe to help expedite your film?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I do have a GoFundMe to help me in my work, but no, I don't have one for the documentary itself. It's already, the grant money just came in, and so hopefully we're going to start refilming again in a week or so.
That's awesome. All right. There's been some, Sanders put some books in there. There's also some comments of films and that in the text, because but I think given that it's 3:25 and I recognize we had till 3:30, I'm wondering, I think everybody on here, honestly, really honest, brutal conversation. I felt in so many ways that we just needed to be together for this one so that we could, you know, all of us are wanting to move this conversation so much further ahead. And so the trick will be for us to keep doing that. Rocky, I'm just wondering if I could pass it back to you. I'm kind of closing.
Yes, Renee, I'm here. Okay, so I just wanted to say a few more things. So our skin color, our language, our foods that we eat, the culture we practice should not be seen as a reason for racist attitudes, remarks, and actions against one another. This should be seen as an opportunity to learn from one another. We're all teachers, we're all experts in our lives, we're all special, we're all treaty people. So we need to appreciate that we're here for one purpose, become one nation, live side by side in harmony, provide comfort, education, respect, and love for one another. And the 94 calls to action, I'm just going to talk a little bit about that because we probably, you've probably read a lot and heard a lot about that. And so it's a means for us as individuals to build a bridge and close the gap between all nations, all cultures, all individuals. We need to take responsibility for our actions and do good. It takes one person at a time to make a better Canada. And as I've said before, we're all one race, the human race. We're all treaty people. And I had looked at some of the calls for action, the 94 calls for action, and there was 3 that I'm going to just go briefly on if we have time. So how do we as treaty people reduce the number of Indigenous children in care? By doing this, we're continuing to support the culture of each child by allowing them to be immersed in their own culture and being proud of who they are and they can become healthy and productive citizens instead of being a strain and a drain on our community. And we can all participate in that. We should be building up the family structure, thereby having the support and resources within the family who is the expert in the family. The end result would be less drugs, alcohol, less treatment centers, less incarceration, and the list goes on and on. And education, this is everybody's responsibility. We're all responsible in ensuring that we are part of the education that our children, our grandchildren, our future leaders are receiving. Phone your educational system and see what is being taught. Go to the schools, the colleges, universities, and provide your expertise. And sometimes we think that the education system is already there and it's not for us to go in and provide the expertise that we all have, the knowledge that we all have. It's our responsibility as treaty people, as human beings, to go in there and provide that support to the schools. Health. If Indigenous health is not addressed in a cultural, respectful and proper manner, this affects us all. The healthcare system is already strained and bursting at the seams, lacking in funding. Hospitals are closing down in some of the smaller communities. Hospitals will remain full. Doctors will continue to be overbooked. Long waits for operations. Prescriptions will continue to be prescribed rather than the real concerns being addressed. And some of my TRC actions are, I do something every single day, whether it's letting someone in traffic in front of me that they're in a rush, or helping someone in the shopping center. I'll help someone put their groceries in their car. Sometimes they look at me like, oh, you're Indigenous, you're gonna steal my groceries. But I just say, okay, that's okay. I don't take offense to that. I clean my community. I go around and I pick up garbage in my community. I say hello to everybody. I smile at everybody. It's just little things that we can do to build that, to bridge that gap, to build a bridge where we can all work together. And I mean, I shovel sidewalks for people that I don't even know. I rake someone's lawn, but if it's someone I don't know, I ask them permission, and I do that. Reading a reputable book on a different culture, asking sincere and respectful questions about someone's culture. Sometimes we think if someone is from a different culture, that if we ask them, you know, tell me about your culture, they're going to be like, oh, you want to know about my culture? That's disrespectful. No, people like to talk about their culture, and people like to educate. So, I mean, it could be different, like it could be Cree, it could be Ojibwe Cree, it could be any culture. Like we need to, like I keep saying, we need to close that gap. We need to build a bridge. We need to become one nation. We need to become one race, the human race, because we are all treaty people. And sometimes we forget. We see the color of the skin, we see the race, we see the culture. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Rocky. Okay, well, that brings us to an end of the session. And I know there's a lot of comments going on about, and I'm just thinking all those, thank you so much for all the resources everybody's posting in there. I'll put that in a list and I'll send it to everybody. So what I'll do is I'll follow up. I'm going to send you an email with those resources, with a link to the YouTube video with this, so you can share it out to anybody you know for the conversations. But there'll also be a little survey in there, and it's a really simple 1-question survey, because a lot of you are saying this conversation needs to continue. Well, we need to understand how we do that moving forward, or what you can see. And so it's just a really tight survey. Just get any of your thoughts, because we hope. We need to speak up and we need to work together. And as much as it's hard sometimes, I think it's so critical. And I really appreciate the honesty of our speakers today. And I'll look forward to hopefully seeing many more of you soon. Chantel's saying weekly. Wow, are we ready? Okay. All right. Well, with that, on behalf of the Coalition's Creating Equity Edmonton team, I just want to say thank you so much. And we will see you hopefully again soon. I know people want to chat. I don't know.
Bye, everybody.